Yeah. So in 2018, I was on a red-eye flight from Alaska, flying back. We were going to connect at Denver, and then I was going to make it back to the East Coast. And we were in the air for 45 minutes. And at this point, I was traveling once a month for work. I was traveling all the time. I was in my 20s, like, didn't think anything about flying. And so we were in the air for about 45 minutes, and I was admittedly like falling asleep. I think it was like midnight. And the pilot came on and was like, "Hey, we're having a mechanical issue. We have to turn back around and we need to get back on the ground back in Anchorage." And I was like, "Okay, well, this is pretty inconvenient, but like I'm starting to get a little nervous now. I don't know what's going on." And they said, like, "Listen, it's a thing we train for all the time. We'll get back to you once we have more information." Um, so they did. They turned around. You could feel that happening. And then we made our way back to Anchorage. And the pilot came back on and was like, "Hey, we're going to make what we call a no flap landing." And they're like, "We train for this all the time, but we're going to let you know we're going to land fast and it's going to feel fast. But you need to listen to the flight attendants." And so at this point, you're starting to kind of look around, look left to right, and passengers are clearly nervous, right? Everyone's starting, like, we all went from like half asleep to a red eye flight to like everyone's like sitting up and it's silent on the plane. And so you can feel we're starting to descend, and it definitely feels different. And then the flight attendants start screaming, "Brace for impact." And they have everybody go in a brace position. And now everyone's looking around, and flight attendants are screaming at you to brace for impact.
Oh
And
yeah.
all you think of is like, this is it. Like, this is it. We're about to crash. I have no idea what's going on. We're going to crash. And so we definitely land fast, and the landing was rough. And like there was stuff flying. Everyone, when we opened overhead bins, once we got there and settled, there was stuff everywhere, and it was a rough landing. But it was fine, and we all walked off the plane fine. It was okay. But in that few minutes where we were descending and landing, I mean, we were being screamed at to brace for landing, and no one had any idea what was really going on. And then so we deplane, we get off. It was a few hours later, and they just sort of announced like, "Okay, we fixed the plane. You're going to get back on the plane now." And everybody was like, "It's been
Uh-uh.
a couple hours." And so we're in Alaska, and I'm sitting there like, is there a train I can take? Like, what's the rental car? Like, I'm Alaska to East Coast. Like, there are no options. Like, the only option here is to get back on the plane. So we get back on the plane, and I was nervous. I was definitely nervous, but it was sort of like, all right, I've been awake for 24 hours at this point. Like, this is the only option. And they never explained to us what happened. And then my next flight after that, I was nervous. And I remember specifically, like, a flight attendant came by and was like, "Would you like something to drink?" And I was like, I can't move right now. Like, I'm holding on for dear life. And I was like, okay, something's happened here. And then it progressively got worse. And then admittedly, 2020 happened, and I didn't fly really much during 2020. And then it got really, really bad. So typically, flights, I'm hysterical crying, full blown panic attacks so bad that flight attendants will get me up out of my seat and put me in a different seat where they could be by me. I have accommodations from work to make sure I always sit in the front of the plane. We plan travel around my flight stress. So it was a specific incident that happened, and that sort of triggered the whole thing. But now that I understand what that specific incident was, it was sort of like, well, why didn't you just tell me that's all it was all those years ago? And I always think back, like, how many other passengers on that flight are struggling with the fear of flying now, when if we were just told what happened, we could understand that it wasn't as big of a deal and it wouldn't have
Totally.
impacted everybody's life. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I've often thought about, because in so many of the calls that we take, it's a similar story, that there was some instance that happened or some, life event that occurred. And whenever it's something that happened like that, it's usually just that one little missing piece of information that is like, yes, this was a mechanical irregularity, but the airplane was fine because the airplane is built for this.
So I ended up missing a lot of connections. It was a big 36-hour travel day. I did
Ooh.
make it back to the East Coast eventually. But as I said, then because I was traveling a fair amount at that point, and then the next flight after that, I was like, this is different. This doesn't feel the same. I'm all
I
of
don't
a
like
sudden
this.
really, really scared. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Were you kind of like waiting on edge, would you say? Or what was the.
yeah. anytime too I felt the plane drop or any sort of descent, quick descent, I definitely was like, what is that? Why are we doing that? What's going on? And then it just kept getting progressively worse. Um, I tried a couple different things. Admittedly, I tried some medication, which made it worse for me. Tried some therapy. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. We just tried a couple things. And it was really sort of the combination of learning as much as I can and really understanding what actually happened. That was sort of the like, oh, this is the thing that's going to do it. Because I travel enough for work. I work for a company that actually does air traffic control systems, a company named Leidos, and we do air traffic control. So I can see sort of the inside of how the systems work. And it was really learning more about the airplane and the flight operations and really working with your team that sort of was like, oh, this isn't a big deal. Um, so I did a call initially with Brett, one of your pilots, when we realized like, all right, this is something I should try. And that first call, my confidence going into that flight was like 100 times higher than it had been. I was like, okay, I
Wow.
can do this.
That's
I
cool.
remember he was like, flying is like a magic carpet ride. And his just sort of infectious enthusiasm about flying, I was like, okay, like there are people that like this. This isn't this miserable thing. There's people out there that actually enjoy this
Oh
experience.
yeah. Yeah.
And so that really, really helped. And then you and I connected and we talked and you walked me through what a no flap landing was. And I was like, well, that makes sense. Like that makes total sense. That wasn't actually unsafe. I just didn't understand it at the time. So that
Totally.
was sort of the progression. Yeah.